Some places don't forget you. They wait. In the dead of night, inside locked buildings, deep in forests where no map dares to guide you, something watches. Not with hunger, not with rage, with patience. These aren't stories about monsters chasing you. They're about the moment you realize the silence around you isn't empty, it's occupied. A shadow that stands just beyond the light, a presence that breathes on the other side of a door, a tally mark added when you weren't looking. And by the time you understand what's happening, it's already counting you. It happened during spring break of my junior year of college, when foolish confidence still felt like protection against the unseen. My three closest friends, Kevin, Ali, and Seb, and I, drove into the Colorado backcountry, somewhere outside of Buena Vista, chasing solitude the way people chase blessings. We had been camping together since freshman year, but that semester we were broke, so we chose dispersed camping instead of paying for a maintained campground. Freedom, we told ourselves, tasted better when it was free. The location came from a camping app, one of those digital maps that promises hidden clearings and forgotten roads. The Forest Service road stretched on endlessly, a ribbon of dust cutting through towering pines like a scar. The deeper we drove, the quieter the world became. No other vehicles, no tire tracks, no smoke from distant fires. Only the heavy stillness of wilderness, thick, watchful, ancient. We found a clearing beside what looked like an old creek bed, long dried and cracked like the bones of something buried. You could tell water had once run there, carving its path with patient persistence. Now it felt abandoned or waiting. We set our tents in a loose cluster, roughly 15 feet apart, without much thought. Wherever the ground looked level and free of rocks, that was good enough. We laughed, cracked open a few beers, played cards beneath a sky slowly dimming into bruised purple. Nothing remarkable, nothing prophetic. But the air carried something I can only describe now as rukya silent, that oppressive quiet scholars of the unseen sometimes speak of, when the veil between worlds feels thinner than it should. At the time, I ignored it. We went to sleep around 11. I am a notoriously light sleeper. Even in my own bed, I wake up multiple times a night, cold, thirsty, restless. Camping makes it worse. Every rustle, every snap of a twig becomes a potential threat. Yet that night, I slept as if sedated, not natural sleep. It felt as though something had pressed a heavy, unseen palm against my consciousness and whispered, "Be still." No dreams, no interruptions, no cold air creeping in, only darkness. And somewhere beyond the fabric of our tents, beneath the silent stars, something ancient shifted in the unseen, like a forgotten jinn stirring beneath desert sands, counting our breaths. It happened during spring break of my junior year of college, when foolish confidence still felt like protection against the unseen. My three closest friends, Kevin, Ali, and Seb, and I drove into the Colorado backcountry, somewhere outside of Buena Vista, chasing solitude the way people chase blessings. We had been camping together since freshman year, but that semester we were broke, so we chose dispersed camping instead of paying for a maintained campground. Freedom, we told ourselves, tasted better when it was free. The location came from a camping app, one of those digital maps that promises hidden clearings and forgotten roads. The Forest Service road stretched on endlessly, a ribbon of dust cutting through towering pines like a scar. The deeper we drove, the quieter the world became. No other vehicles, no tire tracks, no smoke from distant fires. Only the heavy stillness of wilderness, thick, watchful, ancient. We found a clearing beside what looked like an old creek bed, long dried and cracked like the bones of something buried. You could tell water had once run there, carving its path with patient persistence. Now it felt abandoned or waiting. We set our tents in a loose cluster, roughly 15 feet apart, without much thought. Wherever the ground looked level and free of rocks, that was good enough. We laughed, cracked open a few beers, played cards beneath a sky slowly dimming into bruised purple. Nothing remarkable, nothing prophetic. But the air carried something I can only describe now as Rukya silent, that oppressive quiet scholars of the unseen sometimes speak of, when the veil between worlds feels thinner than it should. At the time, I ignored it. We went to sleep around 11. I am a notoriously light sleeper. Even in my own bed, I wake up multiple times a night, cold, thirsty, restless. Camping makes it worse. Every rustle, every snap of a twig becomes a potential threat. Yet that night, I slept as if sedated. Not natural sleep. It felt as though something had pressed a heavy, unseen palm against my consciousness and whispered, "Be still." No dreams, no interruptions, no cold air creeping in, only darkness. And somewhere beyond the fabric of our tents, beneath the silent stars, something ancient shifted in the unseen, like a forgotten djinn stirring beneath desert sands, counting our breaths. When I woke the next morning, something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the clearing itself was holding its breath. I unzipped my tent slowly, expecting sunlight and the ordinary stillness of a forest morning. Instead, I froze. All 4 of our tents had been moved. Not torn, not knocked over by wildlife, not disturbed by wind. Moved. They now stood in a perfect square formation, geometrically precise, surrounding a small pile of stones in the center. Stones that had absolutely not been there the night before. For several seconds, I genuinely believed I was still dreaming. The sight felt ritualistic, intentional, deliberate. Each tent had been relocated roughly 20 to 30 feet from where we had originally pitched them. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The stakes were still perfectly driven into the ground. The guy lines were tight. Nothing inside had been disturbed. My sleeping bag lay exactly as I had left it. My phone was still plugged into my portable charger, every zipper sealed, every object untouched. It was as if some unseen force had lifted the tents, us inside them, and repositioned us like pieces on a chessboard. My hands began to tremble. I yelled for the others. Kevin was the first to unzip his tent. He stepped out, scanned the clearing, and immediately locked eyes with me. I didn't have to explain anything. His face mirrored the same disbelief, the same creeping horror. Ali and Seb emerged moments later. The silence between the 4 of us felt unnatural, like we were waiting for someone else to speak, someone unseen. It felt almost like there was a 5th presence in the clearing.
Not visible, not audible, but aware, watching. Allie was the first to break the silence. She said she had a vivid dream she was walking in a straight line through a vast desert while someone counted her steps aloud in Arabic, slowly, methodically. Kevin swallowed and admitted he had dreamed of marching in formation, like a soldier in an army, synchronized footsteps echoing across empty terrain. Seb and I had no memory of dreaming, but the symmetry of their visions unsettled us. Straight lines, counting, formation, arrangement. The pile of stones stood in the center, 4 stones stacked carefully atop one another, balanced with unnatural precision. It didn't look random, it looked constructed, like a sigil, a marker, a silent invocation. The forest around us felt different now. The trees no longer seemed passive, they felt like witnesses, or sentinels. I remember thinking, though I didn't say it out loud, that whatever had moved us had not done so with violence. It had done so with purpose, and purpose is always more frightening. For a moment, Kevin tried to rationalize it. Maybe we gotten drunk and sleepwalked. Maybe we rearranged everything ourselves and somehow forgot. But that theory collapsed when we noticed the drag marks in the dirt. From each tent's original position, long furrows carved through the soil led toward the new placement. The marks stopped roughly 10 feet short of each final position, as if something had dragged them part way, then lifted them, carried them, placed them, gently. My skin prickled with a sensation I can only describe as sear, the oppressive awareness that something unseen had enacted a ritual around us while we slept, binding our bodies in stillness like subjects of an occult design. And deep in the pit of my stomach, I knew whatever had done this had been close. Close enough to touch the fabric inches from our faces. Close enough to listen to us breathe. We didn't speak while loading the car. Not because we had agreed not to, but because words felt fragile, like they might shatter whatever thin barrier was keeping something worse from happening. The drive back down the endless Forest Service road felt longer than it had the day before. The same trees, the same dust, the same sky. But the air inside the car felt contaminated. Kevin kept glancing in the rearview mirror more than necessary. Allie stared straight ahead, unmoving, her fingers locked together in her lap. Seb had his arms folded tightly across his chest, as if bracing against something invisible pressing inward. And I couldn't shake the sensation that we were not alone in that vehicle. It wasn't the childish paranoia of being watched from the woods. It was subtler than that. It felt internal, as if something had followed us, not physically, but spiritually, like a trace of whatever had rearranged our world that night had attached itself to the space between us. The silence grew heavy. Finally, about 20 minutes into the drive, Allie whispered something that made my stomach drop. "Do you guys feel different?" No one answered immediately, because we all did. It wasn't exhaustion, it wasn't adrenaline, it was connection, but corrected. The best way I can describe it is this. It felt as though our thoughts were brushing against one another, like there was no longer a clear boundary between where I ended and Kevin began. At one point, Kevin muttered "square" under his breath, and I swear to God, I had just been thinking about the same word. No one reacted outwardly, but we all felt it. The symmetry, the formation, the 4 stones, 4 tenths, 4 people, and yet the feeling of a 5th presence persisted. Not sitting in a seat, not visible in the mirror, but woven through us, an ancient observer, a silent witness, something that had stood in the center of that square while we slept, counting silently like a desert spirit, measuring devotion. Something that had moved our shelters as if positioning offerings around an unseen altar. We didn't stop for food. We didn't joke about it. We didn't try to rationalize it again. By the time we reached civilization, the connection had dulled, but it hadn't vanished. Over the following weeks, small things began to change. Our group dynamic shifted. Conversations overlapped strangely. Sometimes two of us would text the exact same sentence at the same time in the group chat. Once, Kevin and I showed up wearing identical shirts we had never seen the other own. Coincidences, maybe, but they felt rehearsed, as if we were being subtly synchronized. Months passed, then years. Life did what life always does. It pulled us apart. Kevin moved to Denver after graduation. Allie went to grad school in California. Seb relocated to Chicago with his girlfriend. I stayed behind. We kept in touch, but we never spoke about that night again. Not once, because acknowledging it would make it real. And there is something about that clearing, about the dry creek bed and the perfect square, that still lingers in the back of my mind like an unfinished invocation. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm half asleep, I feel that same unnatural heaviness pressing down on me, that same forced stillness, and I wonder, did something arrange us that night for a purpose? Was it a ritual we interrupted? Or worse, did we complete it?
5 years have passed. Time should have dulled it. Memory should have distorted it. But the details remain unnervingly precise, like something etched into bone rather than mind. We never returned to that clearing outside Buena Vista. We never searched for answers. We never even compared notes in depth. Silence became our unspoken pact. Kevin built a life in Denver. Allie buried herself in graduate school in California. Seb moved to Chicago. We text on birthdays. We exchange surface-level updates. But none of us mention the square. Not the stones, not the rumbling, and certainly not the dreams. Yet sometimes when I close my eyes, I see it clearly. The 4/10ths arranged in perfect geometry around that small pile of rocks. I remember the drag marks stopping 10 feet short. The precision, the gentleness. That's what unsettles me most. Whatever moved us did so carefully, intentionally. There was no chaos, no violence, no torn fabric, no missing belongings. It wasn't the behavior of a wild animal. It felt ceremonial, like we had been positioned, aligned, measured. I've replayed the possibilities countless times. Sleepwalking doesn't explain the drag marks. A prank doesn't explain the synchronized dreams. An earthquake doesn't grind like a stone door opening somewhere beneath the earth. And the rumbling began the moment the stones were knocked down. Not before, not after, as if something ancient had been disturbed, like breaking a seal on an occult sigil drawn in dust. There is one detail I never told the others. When we were driving away that morning, just before the forest road curved and the clearing disappeared from view, I looked back once, just once, in the side mirror. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something standing in the center of where our square had been. Not a full figure, more like distortion, like heat rising off desert sand, a vertical shimmer where the stones had stood, tall, unmoving, watching. Maybe it was just light. Maybe it was my imagination.
But sometimes in that space between waking and sleep, I hear something counting softly in a language I don't understand. Slow, measured, patient. And I can't help but wonder, if 4 stones were stacked for 4 of us, who or what was the 5th point in the pattern?
The next part of the story will fill your mind with dread. Tell me, where are you right now? How intense is your fear? Comment below. If you're new, follow now.
My name is Simon. This happened last summer when I was 23. My girlfriend, Cadence, and I had planned the camping trip for months. Just the 2 of us. No cell service, no notifications, no outside world intruding on whatever fragile thing our relationship had become. We had been together for about 1.5 years. Nothing was wrong exactly, but everything had grown routine, predictable, quiet in the wrong way. We told ourselves that a weekend in the woods would cleanse that stagnation, reset us. We chose a small campground deep inside Uwharrie National Forest in North Carolina, remote enough for privacy, but not so isolated that it felt reckless. According to the reviews, there were only 6 or 7 sites, spaced far apart. Seclusion without danger. Or so I believed. We left Friday afternoon around 3, stopped at a grocery store near the forest entrance for supplies, and reached the campground just before sunset. The road in was rough, potholes, loose gravel, but my truck handled it fine. When we pulled into the main clearing, I felt satisfied. A few picnic tables, scattered fire rings, tall trees standing like silent sentries around the perimeter. We drove slowly past the sites. Most were empty, except one. A blue sedan sat alone at a campsite near the middle of the loop. No tent visible, no person in sight. Just the car. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't inviting either. It felt paused. Cadence pointed toward the very last site at the end of the road, where the gravel simply stopped and forest swallowed the path whole. Trees wrapped tightly around the clearing, blocking the view of every other campsite. Perfect, she said, and she was right. It was private, hidden, almost too hidden. We spent the next hour setting up. Cadence is meticulous about arrangements, symmetry, placement, comfort, so I followed her direction while the sky deepened from orange to bruised violet. By the time we finished, darkness had begun pooling beneath the trees. I built a fire. She made sandwiches. We drank beer and watched the flames dance in the growing night. For a while, it felt exactly how it was supposed to feel. Quiet, intimate, safe. But around 10, Cadence walked to the spigot near the picnic tables to brush her teeth, leaving me alone by the fire. That's when I noticed him. A figure standing just beyond the firelight, right at the edge where brightness dissolved into black. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard breathing. He was simply there. I startled hard enough that he raised his hands slightly and apologized for scaring me. He said his name was Aiden. He was camping in the blue sedan and just wanted to introduce himself. He looked about 30, average build, neutral clothing, but his eyes, they held contact too long, unblinking, intent. Not aggressive, not friendly, evaluating. Cadence returned and the shift was immediate. Aiden's attention pivoted entirely to her. I might as well have disappeared. He complimented our campsite choice, said it was real secluded. There was something ironic about that statement, considering he had just materialized unannounced from the darkness. He claimed he was solo camping, trying to get away from people for the weekend, which made his presence at our fire feel contradictory. He spoke mostly to Cadence, ignoring my replies, holding eye contact with her in a way that felt invasive rather than flirtatious. His gaze didn't waver. It lingered, studied, measured. The fire crackled between us, and I suddenly became aware of how dark the woods were beyond him, how easily someone could stand just out of sight. Eventually, I cut the conversation short, telling him we planned to wake early and needed sleep. He apologized again and stepped backward into the darkness, and I noticed something that unsettled me more than anything else. He didn't use a flashlight, not even a phone. He walked straight into the black woods as if he could see perfectly, as if the darkness belonged to him. Cadence and I exchanged a look once he was gone. We both agreed the interaction had felt off, not overtly threatening, just wrong, like something about him didn't align. We put out the fire an hour later and climbed into the tent. I tried to let it go, tried to convince myself that forests magnify paranoia. But as I drifted toward sleep, I couldn't shake the sensation that someone, somewhere beyond the trees, was still watching the last embers of our fire fade and waiting.
I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. Not gradually, not peacefully, abruptly. My eyes snapped open, and within 3 seconds I understood why. I was hearing voices. Low, muffled, close enough that I could distinguish 2 separate tones. They weren't whispering urgently. They were conversing, calmly, somewhere near our campsite. For a moment, I lay completely still, listening. Cadence was beside me, breathing steadily, still asleep. The realization sharpened something inside me, an instinct I didn't know I possessed until that second, protective, alert. The voices continued for maybe 5 more seconds, then stopped. Not faded, stopped, as if whoever was speaking had sensed that I was awake. I slowly reached for my phone, trying not to make a sound. My heart was beating so hard I was certain it was audible through the thin nylon walls of the tent. Carefully, I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer outside. The campground was swallowed in darkness. No firelight, no moon bright enough to be useful. I switched on my phone's flashlight and swept the beam across our clearing. Empty. The trees stood still. The picnic table, the fire pit, the truck. Nothing moved. I stepped fully outside, shining the light farther into the woods. Silence. Not even the distant shuffle of someone walking away. It was as though the conversation had never existed. Eventually, I went back inside. I told myself it was a public campground. People stay up late. Maybe someone had been walking the road. Maybe it had been Aiden returning to his sedan. Still, why had the voices stopped instantly the moment I unzipped the tent? I didn't tell Cadence the next morning. There didn't seem to be a point in worrying her over what could have been nothing. The day passed normally. We hiked for hours, sweat and sunlight replacing the unease of the night. We laughed, took pictures, talked about trivial things. For a while, the forest felt harmless again. But as the sun dipped lower and shadows stretched long between the trees, I walked to the truck to grab more firewood. That's when I saw it, a folded napkin tucked under the windshield wiper. My stomach tightened before I even unfolded it. Inside, written in simple, deliberate handwriting, "You should move your tent." No signature, no explanation. The words weren't frantic, they weren't scrawled in panic. They were calm, advisory, like a warning. I brought it back to Cadence and told her about the voices from the night before. The color drained from her face almost instantly. "Aiden," she said. "It had to be. Who else even knew we were there?"
As if summoned by the mention of his name, he appeared again, not from the road, from between the trees, walking toward our campsite with the same steady pace, wearing the exact same clothes as the day before. The rage inside me flared immediately. I told him he needed to stop approaching our site without warning. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. He apologized in a low, rough tone, said he was just checking up on us. Checking up. The phrase unsettled me more than the note. Cadence asked him why he would need to check on us. For a second, something flickered across his face. Hesitation, maybe. Then he said something that shifted the air around us. He told us he was surprised to see people our age camping there, that strange things had been known to happen in this area. Deserted campsites discovered deep in the woods, belongings left behind, signs of people who were never found. He spoke calmly, matter of fact, not like someone trying to scare us, like someone recounting weather patterns. I wanted to dismiss him entirely. I didn't trust him, but there was something in his tone that didn't match manipulation. It matched experience. He added that he heard people walking around his car the previous night, multiple people, and that he planned to leave before sunset. He suggested we do the same. The forest around us seemed to grow quieter as he spoke, as if listening. And for the first time since we arrived, the idea of staying another night felt like a mistake.
Once Aiden said he was leaving before sunset, the decision made itself. Cadence didn't argue. I didn't either. The sky was already dimming, bleeding orange into bruised gray through the trees. Shadows thickened fast in that forest, swallowing distance in minutes. We packed in tense silence, movements sharp and hurried. I could see Cadence's hands shaking as she folded the tent. I tried to steady her, telling her it was probably bored locals messing around. But the words felt hollow even to me. Aiden returned to his campsite while we loaded the truck. I didn't watch him go. I didn't want to. Within 20 minutes, everything was thrown into the bed of the truck. Not neatly, not carefully, just contained. I started the engine and began driving toward the exit loop. That's when I noticed something wrong. Aiden's blue sedan was still parked exactly where it had been. He had said he was leaving, but the car hadn't moved. As I drove past, I saw him crouched beside one of his tires. The way he was positioned, shoulders slumped, head bowed, sent a pulse of dread through me. Against my better judgment, I stopped. I rolled down the window and asked what was going on. He stepped back from the car. The front passenger tire had a massive gash carved into it. Not a puncture, not a slow leak, a deliberate slash. The rubber was torn open violently, the edges jagged and unmistakable. Cadence whispered, "Oh my God." There was no way that happened accidentally. No rock does that, no branch. Someone had done it. Aiden looked shaken now, genuinely shaken. The composed, observant tone from earlier was gone. He asked if we could give him a ride. Cadence's fingers dug into my arm immediately. "No," she whispered urgently. I hesitated. The situation twisted in my head. If he was involved in something, this could be manipulation. If he wasn't, he was stranded in the woods with whoever had slashed his tire. I told him we couldn't take him. The disappointment in his face was immediate, but not angry, just resigned. Then he asked if I could at least call the police once I got service. I told him I would, and I meant it. I shifted the truck into gear and pulled away, leaving him crouched beside the ruined tire as the last of the daylight faded. We were maybe 100 yards down the dirt road when it happened.
My headlights swept across the trees to the right, and I saw them. 3 figures, standing about 30 feet into the woods. They weren't moving, they weren't hiding, they were just there, watching the road, watching us. Even in the brief second the beams illuminated them, I could tell they were human, upright, still, close enough that I could see the outlines of heads and shoulders. Not deer, not shadows, people. My foot hit the brake instinctively. The truck slowed. A thought flashed through my mind. Aiden. If those figures had slashed his tire, he was still back there alone. Maybe I should warn him. Maybe I should... Cadence grabbed my arm with both hands and screamed. Not a startled yell, a primal, desperate scream. "Drive!" And something in her voice shattered my hesitation. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. Gravel sprayed behind us as the truck lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but darkness swallowing the road. Cadence didn't speak again for the rest of the drive to the highway. Neither did I, but I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Those figures hadn't been surprised by our headlights. They hadn't flinched. They hadn't run. They had been standing there deliberately, like sentinels, like watchers waiting for something to happen, and we had driven directly through their field of vision. The moment we reached the main highway and my phone regained service, I pulled over. My hands were trembling so badly, I nearly dropped the phone while dialing 911. The dispatcher answered in a calm, rehearsed voice. I explained everything: the strange man at the campsite, the voices at 3 in the morning, the warning note, the slashed tire, and the 3 figures standing in the woods. I gave them the exact location of the campground and described Aiden's blue sedan. The dispatcher assured me that a unit would be sent to check on him. Her tone was steady, professional, detached. When the call ended, the silence inside the truck felt heavier than before. Cadence stared straight ahead, her face pale, jaw tight. The adrenaline was beginning to drain from both of us, leaving behind something colder: guilt. I kept replaying the image of Aiden crouched beside his tire, alone, stranded, the forest swallowing daylight behind him. If those 3 figures had done that to his car, what were they planning next? The drive blurred. Neither of us turned on the radio. Every set of headlights behind us made my chest tighten. Every dark stretch of road felt longer than it should. When we finally reached our apartment, the normalcy of streetlights and traffic felt surreal. Safe. Too safe. We didn't talk much that night. The following day, I expected a call back, a voicemail, something. Nothing came. I considered calling the local sheriff's department myself, but a part of me hesitated. What would I even say? "Hi, did you find the strange man in the woods whose tire was slashed near 3 silent figures standing in the trees?" It sounded insane when stripped of emotion. Cadence tried to reassure me. She suggested Aiden might have been part of it, that maybe he staged the slashed tire to trap us, that the figures were his friends. It was possible, but something didn't sit right. If it had been a setup, why let us leave? Why ask us to call the police? Why look genuinely shaken? Days passed. No news reports, no missing persons alerts, no follow-up call. It was as if the entire situation had dissolved the moment we drove away. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the positioning of those 3 figures. They hadn't been chasing us. They hadn't been hiding. They were placed, deliberately, like they were marking territory or witnessing something. And then there's another detail that unsettles me with time. When I first saw Aiden at the edge of our campsite that first night, he hadn't startled like someone caught off guard by headlights or firelight. He had already been standing there, watching. And when I think about that now, about the way he appeared without sound, about how he navigated the darkness without a flashlight, I can't help but wonder, was he warning us or was he measuring us? Because sometimes in the quiet hours when sleep refuses to come, I replay that final image in my mind. 3 figures in the woods, and I ask myself something I don't like admitting. What if they weren't there for him? What if they were there for us?
Weeks turned into months. Life resumed its predictable rhythm. Work, errands, conversations about things that mattered less than they felt like they did. From the outside, nothing had changed, but something had. Cadence began double-checking the locks at night. Not once, 3 times. I caught myself glancing at parked cars longer than necessary, studying silhouettes behind tinted glass. Neither of us brought up Aiden directly anymore, but his presence lingered between us like unfinished business. One night, about 2 months after the trip, I couldn't sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I got up to grab water from the kitchen. As I passed the living room window, something made me pause. A car was parked across the street. It wasn't unusual, street parking was common, but this car had its engine off and its headlights dark, just sitting there beneath a dim street lamp. A sedan. Blue. My stomach tightened immediately. I told myself blue sedans are common, that paranoia magnifies coincidence. Still, I stood there for nearly a full minute watching it. Then slowly, the interior dome light flickered on for half a second, and off, like someone adjusting their position inside. I couldn't see a face, couldn't see movement clearly, just the brief glow. I stayed frozen behind the curtain. After another minute, the car started. The engine's low hum carried through the night air. It pulled away slowly, deliberately, disappearing down the street without speeding. I didn't wake Cadence. I didn't call the police. I told myself it was nothing. But here's the part that refuses to leave me. When we saw those 3 figures in the woods that night, they hadn't reacted like people startled by headlights. They had reacted like observers whose task was complete. And Aiden, if he was innocent, then someone deliberately disabled his vehicle. If he was involved, then he wanted us to leave before something happened. Either way, there was coordination, intent, pattern. Sometimes I think about the note on our windshield. You should move your tent. Not leave, not run. Move. As if our exact positioning in that campsite mattered. As if we had unknowingly placed ourselves somewhere we weren't meant to be. Or somewhere something else needed to be. I don't know what happened to Aiden. I don't know if the police ever reached him. I only know this. When headlights sweep across trees now, I look for still figures between them. Because once you've seen watchers standing silently in the forest, unmoving, unafraid, waiting, you never quite believe the woods are empty again. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see them. Not advancing, not retreating, just standing there, like they're waiting for the next car to stop. The next part of the story will fill your mind with dread. Tell me, where are you right now? How intense is your fear? Comment below. If you're new, follow now. This happened 2 days ago. I'm 28,
an IT consultant working remotely out of Bozeman, Montana. After my divorce 3 months ago, I convinced myself that isolation would fix what therapy, friends, and routine could not. I didn't want distraction. I didn't want comfort. I wanted silence. The kind of silence so deep it feels like you've stepped outside the world. So I did something impulsive and stupid at 2 a.m. I fell down an online rabbit hole and found an old backcountry camping forum. Buried inside it were coordinates to unofficial sites in Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest. Remote, unmarked, forgotten. Perfect. I told only my brother that I'd be camping somewhere in that general region. I didn't give him exact coordinates. At the time, I told myself it was independence. Now I call it negligence. By Thursday, my truck was packed with enough supplies for over a week. Freeze-dried meals, water purification tablets, a full first aid kit, and my Remington 700. I'm not reckless about firearms, but you don't go deep into Montana wilderness without protection from wildlife. The first 3.5 hours of the drive were smooth. Highway to county road to Forest Service road. The last stretch was different. My GPS kept trying to reroute me. The service road I needed wasn't mapped properly. After backtracking twice and cross-referencing vague form descriptions, I found what looked like an overgrown trail, half swallowed by brush. Twice I had to get out and drag fallen branches out of the way. The deeper I drove, the narrower it became. Eventually, it was no longer a road, just 2 faint tire tracks cutting through grass. I drove until the path ended in a small clearing and killed the engine. The silence hit instantly. No distant vehicles, no planes, no human noise, just wind brushing through pine needles. The clearing itself was decent. Flat ground, tree cover, enough space to set up camp. Except I wasn't alone. About 30 feet away stood an old olive green tent. At first glance, I assumed someone else had found the coordinates, but something about it was wrong. It looked ancient. The fabric sagged. Mold bloomed visibly across the upper panels, dark and spreading. The material had that faded, brittle look of something abandoned for years. No recent tire tracks, no fresh footprints. Just the tent, still standing. I called out, "Hello?" No response. I waited. Nothing. The zipper flap was partly open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Curiosity overrode caution. I walked closer. The smell hit before I fully opened it. A thick, rancid stench, like rot and damp earth trapped for too long. I pulled my shirt over my nose and unzipped the tent completely. Inside was an empty sleeping bag, several old soup cans, and a small notebook. Nothing else. No body, no visible source of the odor, but the smell lingered heavily, like something had once been there and recently enough that decay hadn't fully surrendered to time. I grabbed the notebook and stepped back into fresh air. The relief was immediate, but it didn't remove the unease crawling up my spine. Back at my truck, I opened the notebook. Every page was filled with tally marks, hundreds of them, grouped carefully in sets of 7. 7 vertical lines, then crossed, over and over. The final page had 42 completed groups. 42 times 7, 294. Nearly 8.5 months. Whatever was being counted had lasted a long time, and the marks stopped mid-page. No explanation, no words, just counting. The forest around me felt heavier as I closed the notebook. For a moment, I considered leaving, but pride or stupidity won. I told myself it was an abandoned survival experiment, some backcountry eccentric tracking days. Nothing supernatural, nothing ominous. I set up my own tent on the opposite side of the clearing, far enough to maintain distance, close enough to keep the old tent in sight. I didn't like the idea of turning my back on it. As dusk settled, I noticed something strange. There were no signs anyone had ever camped here before. No fire rings, no trash, no trails worn into the brush, no footprints, just untouched grass, except for the tent and me. That night, the stars were brutally clear above the treetops, the kind of sky that makes you feel small and exposed. I fell asleep faster than expected, and sometime, deep in the night, something woke me.
I don't know what time it was when I woke up. No scream, no animal growl, just a slow, deliberate sound. Scrape, scrape, like someone dragging their fingernails across nylon. I lay completely still inside my tent, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sound came again, closer this time, right along the side wall. Not wind, not branches. It was controlled, intentional. I slowly reached for my headlamp and my Remington 700. My mouth was dry. Every worst-case scenario ran through my head. Bear, mountain lion, or someone who shouldn't be out here. "Hello?" I called out. The scraping stopped. Silence pressed in from all sides. Then suddenly, the back wall of my tent pushed inward, hard, like someone testing it, feeling for movement. "Hey!" I shouted. Immediately, footsteps exploded into the brush, fast, retreating. I unzipped the tent and stepped out with the rifle raised, headlamp slicing through the darkness. Nothing. Just trees, dense Montana timber, shadows stacked between trunks. My beam drifted toward the old olive-green tent across the clearing. The zipper was open, halfway down. I froze. I was absolutely certain I had zipped it closed earlier. I moved slowly toward it, boots crunching on pine needles that suddenly sounded way too loud. "Who's there?" I demanded. No response. I pulled the flap open and aimed the light inside. Empty sleeping bag, rusted soup cans, the notebook I'd already taken. The smell was worse, thicker, like something organic had recently been inside that confined space. I backed away, scanning the tree line. That's when I realized something was very wrong. The forest was completely silent. No crickets, no small animals, no wind. In Montana wilderness, silence like that doesn't happen unless something is very high on the food chain or very wrong. I returned to my tent and zipped it shut, safety off, rifle across my lap. I didn't sleep. About an hour later, scrape. This time from directly in front of me. Slow, careful. My breath stopped in my chest. Then I heard it. Breathing, not animal panting, human breathing, steady, close, right outside the thin layer of nylon separating us. I clicked on my headlamp. The light illuminated the inside wall of my tent and cast a shadow. Tall, too tall. Its head tilted slightly to one side. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. "Leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The shadow didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lowered, bending down like it was crouching. Its hand shape appeared against the fabric, long fingers, too long, and then the zipper at the base of my tent twitched. I flipped the rifle up. "Don't!" The shadow froze. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then slowly, it stood back up,
and stepped away. But here's the part I can't explain. There were no retreating footsteps, no branches snapping, no sound at all. The forest noises returned instantly. Crickets chirping, a distant owl, wind through the trees, like someone flipped a switch. I didn't move until sunrise. When light finally filled the clearing, I stepped outside. The ground was damp from overnight condensation, and right in front of my tent, footprints. Humanoid, but wrong. The toes were elongated, almost finger-like, and the tracks stopped at my tent. They didn't turn around. They didn't circle away. They simply ended, like whatever stood there either vanished or was still somewhere in those trees, watching.
Morning should have made everything feel rational. It didn't. The sun was fully up over the Montana tree line, burning away the last of the mist in the clearing. Birds were active again. The forest looked normal. But those footprints were still there, clear, detailed, undeniable. They came from the tree line straight to the front of my tent. 5 long toes, deep heel impression. About a size 11 if it were human, except the toes were nearly twice as long as they should be. And there were no return tracks. I crouched down and studied them carefully. The soil was soft enough that if someone had jumped, climbed, or run off, there would have been disturbance. There wasn't. The tracks simply stopped. I stood slowly and turned toward the trees. That feeling came back, the one from last night. The sensation of being observed, not hunted, observed. I told myself it was adrenaline messing with my perception, lack of sleep, isolation. The mind fills gaps when it's afraid. Still, I made a decision. I wasn't staying another night. But before packing up, I wanted answers. I grabbed the old notebook from my truck and walked back to the abandoned tent. In daylight, it looked even worse. Fabric flaking, seams rotting, mold spreading like veins across the material. This thing had been here for years. No way someone had been actively using it recently. Unless they weren't using it in a normal way. I stepped back inside, holding my breath against the odor. The smell wasn't just rot anymore. It was layered, damp earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic. I knelt down and inspected the ground beneath the sleeping bag. The soil under it was darker than the rest, disturbed recently. My pulse quickened. I stepped back out, grabbed the folding shovel from my truck, and returned. Every instinct told me not to dig. I dug anyway. The first few inches were soft, damp, easy to move. Then the shovel hit something solid. Not rock, something that gave slightly. I dropped the shovel and used my hands. Within seconds, pale material emerged through the soil. Fabric, then skin, grayish, sunken. I stumbled backward, heart slamming into my ribs. It was a body, half buried beneath the tent, decomposed but not skeletonized, weeks old, maybe months. The face was partially collapsed inward, but enough remained to see the expression. Mouth open, eyes wide, frozen in terror. I staggered to my feet and nearly tripped over something behind me. I turned and felt every drop of blood drain from my body. More footprints, fresh ones, same elongated toes. These hadn't been there earlier. They circled the tent, slowly, methodically, and they were heading back toward the tree line. But this time, there were return tracks leading away, like whatever had stood outside my tent last night
had stayed, watched me discover the body. I scanned the forest desperately, rifle raised. Nothing moved, nothing visible, but the silence was back, thick, pressurized. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I bolted to my truck, keys shaking in my hand. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The old notebook was still on my passenger seat, but it was open. I hadn't left it open. The final page, the one filled with tally marks, had something new scratched into it. One additional line. The 295th mark. Morning should have made everything feel rational. It didn't. The sun was fully up over the Montana tree line, burning away the last of the mist in the clearing. Birds were active again. The forest looked normal. But those footprints were still there. Clear, detailed, undeniable. They came from the tree line straight to the front of my tent. 5 long toes, deep heel impression. About a size 11 if it were human, except the toes were nearly twice as long as they should be. And there were no return tracks. I crouched down and studied them carefully. The soil was soft enough that if someone had jumped, climbed, or run off, there would have been disturbance. There wasn't. The tracks simply stopped. I stood slowly and turned toward the trees. That feeling came back, the one from last night, the sensation of being observed. Not hunted, observed. I told myself it was adrenaline messing with my perception, lack of sleep, isolation. The mind fills gaps when it's afraid. Still, I made a decision. I wasn't staying another night. But before packing up, I wanted answers. I grabbed the old notebook from my truck and walked back to the abandoned tent. In daylight, it looked even worse. Fabric flaking, seams rotting, mold spreading like veins across the material. This thing had been here for years. No way someone had been actively using it recently. Unless they weren't using it in a normal way. I stepped inside again, holding my breath against the odor. The smell wasn't just rot anymore. It was layered, damp earth, mildew, and something faintly metallic. I knelt down and inspected the ground beneath the sleeping bag. The soil under it was darker than the rest, disturbed. Recently, my pulse quickened. I stepped back out, grabbed the folding shovel from my truck, and returned. Every instinct told me not to dig. I dug anyway. The first few inches were soft, damp, easy to move. Then the shovel hit something solid. Not rock, something that gave slightly. I dropped the shovel and used my hands. Within seconds, pale material emerged through the soil. Fabric, then skin, grayish, sunken. I stammered backward, heart slamming into my ribs. It was a body, half buried beneath the tent, decomposed but not skeletonized, weeks old, maybe months. The face was partially collapsed inward, but enough remained to see the expression. Mouth open, eyes wide, frozen in terror. I staggered to my feet and nearly tripped over something behind me. I turned and felt every drop of blood drain from my body. More footprints, fresh ones, same elongated toes. These hadn't been there earlier. They circled the tent, slowly, methodically, and they were heading back toward the tree line. But this time, there were return tracks leading away, like whatever had stood outside my tent last night had stayed, watched me discover the body. I scanned the forest desperately, rifle raised. Nothing moved, nothing visible, but the silence was back, thick, pressurized. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I bolted to my truck, keys shaking in my hand. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The old notebook was still on my passenger seat, but it was open. I hadn't left it open. The final page, the one filled with tally marks, had something new scratched into it. One additional line, the 295th mark.
I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just moved. I jumped back into the truck, slammed the door, and turned the key again. The engine roared to life instantly this time, smooth, normal, like nothing had ever been wrong. I didn't hesitate. I hit the gas. The truck lunged forward, and this time it didn't stop. The path out of the clearing was back. 2 worn tire tracks cutting through the grass exactly where they had been before. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't slow down for branches. I drove like something was chasing me, even though deep down I knew it didn't need to. If it wanted me, it wouldn't run. It would wait. It took nearly 40 minutes before I reached the main Forest Service road. When my phone finally picked up 1 bar of signal, I pulled over, hands still trembling, and called 911. I reported a body, gave coordinates, tried to explain what I'd found. I did not mention the creature. I knew how that would sound. 2 sheriff's deputies met me near the highway turnout about an hour later. I led them back toward the clearing. Except it wasn't there. We drove the exact route I had taken, the overgrown path, the fallen branches I'd moved. But the trail ended in nothing but dense forest. No clearing, no tent, no disturbed soil, no body. The deputies searched for nearly 2 hours. Nothing. No tire marks, no campsite, no sign anyone had ever been there. They looked at me the way people look at someone they're politely deciding might not be stable. Stress, trauma, isolation. That's what they suggested. Eventually, I gave up arguing. They escorted me back to the highway and told me to go home. I did. I haven't been back since. But here's the part that won't let me sleep. 3 nights after I returned to Bozeman, I awoke at exactly 2:17 a.m. No alarm, no noise, just sudden awareness. And there it was again. That sound. Scrape, scrape. Not outside in the forest. Outside my apartment bedroom door. Slow, careful, deliberate. I lay frozen in bed, staring at the crack beneath the door. The hallway light was off. Everything was dark. Then a shadow passed under the door, tall, still, head slightly tilted. I couldn't breathe. The doorknob turned slightly, not fully, just enough to test it. Locked. After a few seconds, the knob stopped moving. The shadow lingered, then slid away. No footsteps, no sound. I didn't move until morning. When sunlight finally filled the room, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare, stress-induced hallucination, sleep paralysis, anything rational. Until I walked into my kitchen. The old notebook was sitting on my table. I had thrown it away at a gas station trash can 3 days earlier. But there it was, open, final page exposed, 42 groups of 7, and beneath the 295th mark,
There were now 3 more tallies, which means it hasn't left. It's just counting again, and tonight will be 299.
And this is where today's frightening tale comes to a close. The night is still young, and the shadows are still watching. Subscribe for more terrifying stories if fear doesn't stop you.